Hey guys, welcome back to Ben & Brewing's channel. If you haven't been here before, we do product reviews, tutorials, and we have a live chat feature on our website to help you through your Brewing 911s. Check it out at benandbrewing.com. Today's video, we're actually doing something different. We're tackling a challenging brew that a lot of people have attempted, but maybe haven't had a lot of success with. Seltzer. There's a lot of challenges that come with brewing a seltzer. We're going to be applying a lot of different techniques. Let's see how it comes out. All right, let's focus on the first question I'm sure a lot of people are having right now. Why are we focused on seltzer for today's video? Well, we've noticed a big trend, and I'm sure you have too in a lot of your local breweries, where more of this craft seltzer has started to come out, and a lot of breweries are putting it on tap. Now, we've tried seltzer in the past, and it came out absolutely awful. However, this was a number of years ago, and there's been a lot of developments and things that have been made as far as brewing techniques to do a seltzer. So we really had the goal of trying to make a base seltzer with no flavors. About a 5% ABV, 5.5, that was clean, with no off flavors, and actually relatively clear without having to use a filter. The reason for that is because that could become a good base later on down the road if we wanted to add flavors to it or make craft cocktails. So the first challenge is actually making a clean seltzer that is good enough to drink just on its own. Now that sounds easy on the offset because you're really looking at sugar with water mixed with yeast. But our first attempts didn't really come out great. They were sulfury, they were cloudy, and they were kind of overly sweet, and not in a good way. It was a cloying sweetness. It was not refreshing or crisp to drink. So similar to making a lager, there's not a lot of room to hide if your fermentation doesn't go right. And fermenting with just straight sugar versus malt sugar is way more difficult than it sounds. So for today's kind of experiment to see what we can do, if we can actually do this, we're deploying a number of different methods to kind of hit it from every angle to get the best fermentation possible out of this batch. The best way for us to test this is going to be on a smaller batch system. So we're using our favorite small batch system, the Pot-Au-Brew, to brew up this batch. And you'll see it actually has a lot of really cool features in it. The floating dip tube, the ability to release pressure, sterile within the pot itself. So there's a lot of good things that make this the perfect system for testing this type of brewing. If you're interested in purchasing any of the items or things that we're using in today's video, especially the Pot-Au-Brew or any of the kind of accoutrements that come with it, we'll have links for that below. Those are affiliate links if you do purchase anything that does help to support our channel. All right, so as I mentioned before, making a seltzer is very, very challenging. And I kind of equated it to making a lager where there's not a lot of room to hide off flavors, so you really have to kind of be on point. The thing that makes seltzer even more difficult is the fact that you're just doing sugar in the water. There's no nutritional value whatsoever for the yeast. So the yeast are very happy to go and ferment out that sugar, but they don't have the proper proteins and amino acids and things they need to have a healthy fermentation. You end up with really weird off flavors and kind of a sulfury character from the yeast because, again, it's not a healthy fermentation. And as I said, the yeast are super happy to kind of chomp on that simple sugar, but they tend to go to sleep very quickly and not actually finish out the fermentation. So we are deploying a number of methods to make sure that they have the nutrition that they need for a strong, clean, healthy fermentation that should, in theory, ferment out that sugar completely and make it extremely dry and crisp. All right, let's talk briefly about some of the fixes we're going to be deploying in the seltzer brew. First off is kind of a big one. It's our choice of sugar. Typically, when you're making seltzer, you're using either a cane sugar or a beet sugar, which the yeast is very happy to ferment out, and it pretty much ferments out 100%. The problem is that actually isn't really well refined. So there are still some complex starches or longer chain sugar molecules in those two types of sugar. So while it is 100% fermentable, the yeast have difficulty chewing through those two specific types of sugar because of the longer chain molecules of starches and sugar that actually exist within those types of sugar. So yes, they can ferment it out, they can absolutely chew through it 100%, but it can add some stress to the yeast and you can get some off flavors with that type of sugar that you're using for fermentation. What we're opting for today is actually to use corn sugar or priming sugar, which if you guys are brewers, you should be very familiar because we use that when carbonating beer in bottle. If you're not keg carbonating, you know adding a little bit of corn sugar to your finished beer and then bottling it, the yeast will wake up and use that for a secondary fermentation or third, depending on how many stages you've got, and it will actually carbonate, but it has no impact on the flavor. Our hope with this is to make sure that the yeast can ferment this out without any off flavors at all. Next, we're actually going to be oxygenating our finished kind of sugar wash with pure O2. For those brewers out there, you guys know how important that is for the yeast cell wall health, especially when they're multiplying. They take up that oxygen and it really lends to a great clean fermentation. We're applying that same principle from brewing into the seltzer fermentation to make sure, again, that they've got everything that they need to ferment out as cleanly as possible. The next thing we're deploying is something you wouldn't necessarily think of, and that's actually pH control. Because we're just adding sugar into water, the pH is not going to be in a range that the yeast are going to be super happy with, unlike beer, which tends to fall pretty close to the range of 5, which is a good range for the yeast health. So we're combating this by adding some minerals for flavor into the water, and then we're going to add the sugar, and then we will test the pH and we'll add lactic acid to make sure that we're pushing it back down closer to 5, which is a much more comfortable range for the yeast so it doesn't stress them out, and again, lend to off flavors. Quick tip as far as the pH goes, be very, very careful because you're just having sugar water. There's not a lot of pH buffers in there. So the pH actually changes very, very quickly. So a little bit of acid goes a very, very long way. The next thing we're doing is we're adding a yeast nutrient, which seems pretty obvious if you think about it because there's not a lot of nutrients in the sugar wash, as I've mentioned a couple times before. The thing is that normal yeast nutrient that we're adding is more geared towards a beer fermentation and not necessarily for seltzer. White Labs actually has come out with a yeast nutrient that is actually specifically designed for the unique chemical makeup of a seltzer. Now, we haven't used it before. I actually ordered it straight from White Labs because I couldn't really find it anywhere else, and our local homebrew shop doesn't carry it. So we're gonna give that a try and see if that helps kind of maybe give us that little bit of edge on the healthy fermentation. Finally, the last thing we're doing is we're gonna add some finings. We're gonna use BioFine to help the yeast drop out of suspension and make it drop bright along with a cold crash. You can achieve the same thing with gelatin or just plain unflavored Jello. They both work the same, they both accomplish the same thing. BioFine is nice because it tends to work a little bit faster. You don't need as much time at that cold temperature to drop it out. And we really wanna kind of turn this over fast to get to tasting it. Fingers crossed with those 5 different things we're deploying to help this seltzer creation. Hopefully we can have a seltzer we can be proud of. All right, let's run through our brew steps for today's brew. Start off with 2 gallons of water. Now we're using RO water in our situation today, so we're gonna be adding some mineral additions to kind of help with the flavoring and to kind of bring back some of the mineral quality that you need with something as clean as a seltzer. Go ahead and add your 2 gallons of water into your boiling pot that you're gonna be using, the Pot-Au-Brew for today. Go ahead and weigh out and measure your mineral additions. For today's brew, we're actually doing 3 grams of calcium chloride and 3 grams of gypsum. You can go ahead and add this to your pot of water as it's beginning to heat up. Next, we actually kind of skipped a step here, so I'm gonna explain it in the process we did it, but there's definitely a faster way to go through and do this. We went ahead and checked the pH at this stage as the mineral additions were in, which you definitely need to do after that to make sure that the pH is gonna fall within that 5 range or the 5 goal. We're gonna bring the pH down using lactic acid to kind of help buffer it because it is going to be high initially. So our initial pH was 5.89, so we actually added only 3 drops of the lactic acid, which dropped it down to 5.67. So we're getting closer. Keep in mind, this is a good learning for us as well. We're used to adjusting the pH when we brew. Well, there's buffers that exist when you're brewing with malt and wort. And so because you're just doing sugar water, there are no buffers. So that pH can run away from you very, very quickly. So make sure you approach it very slowly. And I know there's calculators that'll kind of get you in the ballpark. I didn't want to use that today. We were just gonna do a little bit at a time until we brought it down to the range we wanted. So being we were at 5.67, I added 3 more drops of lactic acid, and unfortunately that dropped it down below our goal of 5 to like a 4.4. So unfortunately I overshot it. But then it occurred to me, I'm measuring the pH at the wrong point in the process. So please learn from my mistake. You wanna make sure everything gets added to the pot before you measure the pH because every addition is going to change it. So by adding the sugar, that actually ended up raising the pH back up. So don't do what I did. Make sure everything is in the pot before you go in and adjust the pH. So at this stage, go ahead and add 1 pound, 8 ounces of corn sugar into the pot. We stirred it up to make sure it was nice and dissolved. And then we took another pH reading just to see where we would land. The good news is the corn sugar brought our pH back up to 5.11, so we were actually right in the ballpark of where we need to be, so we were super happy with that. Next, you're gonna wanna boil the entire volume for about 15 minutes. So as it's coming up to a boil, now's the time to add your yeast nutrient. We added 1/8 of an ounce to the pot, and it actually ended up being kind of chunky. I think it had gotten wet or damp or something. So we made sure that it dissolved, and we let that bring to a boil. Now the purpose of the 15-minute boil is really just to sanitize or sterilize the entire volume itself. There's no other benefit beyond that. It doesn't break down the sugars. There's no enzymes doing anything. It's really just for the sake of sterilization. Once the boil is complete, go ahead and immediately put your Pot-Au-Brew lid on, including your Float It 2.0, the floating dip tube that comes with it. The steam will come up and sanitize the underside of the pot lid, and having the Float It 2.0 in the boiling liquid will sanitize that as well. You will have a perfectly hermetically sealed, sterile environment. Don't forget to put the sterile filter on the lid as well. This is a great device that actually has a, I don't remember the micron on it, but it's super fine filter, so that as that pot starts to cool and it wants to suck air back in, it's actually coming through a sterile filter. You won't have any negative pressure on the mass. Let the entire volume cool down to about 80 degrees or so. At that point, we're gonna take the lid off and we're going to actually oxygenate it using pure O2. If you don't have the option of using an oxygen tank with pure O2, you can use a aquarium pump with a sintered stone and an inline filter. You're gonna be kind of pumping air in that for probably 3, 4, 5 minutes. You could go 10 to be on the safe side. There's no way to over oxygenate it using an aquarium pump, so that's definitely a great option. For us, we're gonna do 1 liter per minute for 30 seconds to make sure there's enough oxygen dissolved in solution. At this point, you are ready to pitch your yeast. Now, a lot of people make seltzers using a wine yeast or a champagne yeast. I wanted to go with something that didn't quite have that specific flavor, so I wanted to go with a very clean beer brewing yeast. We'll see how well that turns out. So we're actually doing the White Labs WLP001, the California Ale, and I'm only gonna pitch about half a pack of that liquid yeast. This is technically an overpitch, and that is strategic because I wanna overpitch to ensure a clean fermentation, then there's enough cells to be able to chew through all the sugar that we put in there. Now, unlike traditional fermentations where you put it in the pot and you control the temperature and you let it ferment out for a week or 10 days or whatever it is, this actually requires a little bit of work. We need to continue to add yeast nutrient for the next 3 days. So we've added our initial yeast nutrient into the boil, we've pitched the yeast. In 24 hours, we're going to take the very top part of the Pot-Au-Brew off, that little porthole that is a great thing for dry hopping and adding additional things to your beer or whatever you're fermenting. We're gonna take that thing off and add another 1/8 of an ounce of that yeast nutrient. Do that for 3 more days, every 24 hours. So 4 additions in total. Your initial at the boil, 3 more after that. The reason that we're spacing out the yeast nutrient is to make sure that we're kind of teasing that yeast along and giving them the nutrients they need as they're continuing to multiply, so that the newer yeast that maybe just budded off still has access to those nutrients, so that all of them can have as much of a chance as possible for that clean fermentation. We're gonna be using a tilt hydrometer or floating hydrometer to be in the pot so we can monitor the final gravity. We're hoping it reaches 1 or maybe less than that at terminal gravity. This might take 4 days, it might take 5 days. The fermentation will go extremely quickly. Once it's reached terminal gravity and sat there for about 2 days without dropping any more, fermentation is done. We're gonna release the pressure from the lid. We're gonna add our fining ingredients, which in this case is biofine. And for this small of a batch, we're gonna do 1/2 teaspoon of the biofine, seal it back up. We're gonna put it back in the fridge, or we're gonna put it in the fridge and we're gonna crash cool it for about 3 days. That was to let the yeast drop out of suspension and to help it to absorb the carbonation that had been produced. Now, because we have been opening the Pot-Au-Brew to add the nutrient additions and to add the finings, you're not gonna have a whole lot of carbonation left to actually dissolve into suspension as you crash cool it. You definitely wanna make sure you have some other source of CO2 to repressurize your seltzer so that it will carbonate. All right, so here we are in the tasting room with our, I'm gonna call it a craft seltzer. It actually took a little bit longer to ferment than we initially thought, but sugar is definitely hard to ferment out. So it really didn't finish up for about 1.5 weeks. And it finished out at 1. So I was hoping it would drop below. It didn't, which is still okay. The one thing I mentioned earlier is that I was gonna add a clarifier to it, like a biofine, to help the yeast drop bright. I crash cooled it and I was going to add it, but I had poured off a sample about a week ago and it was actually already dropping bright. So I hadn't added any clarifier at all. It is crystal clear, which I am pleasantly surprised.
It looks like water.
Shocked with, yes. Carbonation level looks good. It should be dry. There shouldn't really be any sweetness of any kind. So let's give it a taste.
Let's dive into it.
Cheers.
Cheers. It does have a sulfury smell.
Has that, yeah.
But I think that's...
Well, a lot of the breweries we've gone to that have the craft seltzer, that's that smell.
It's actually very clean.
Very clean. There's going to be some yeast esters in there because it is fermented and we're using sugar, which it is happy to do, but it's not real healthy for it. On its own, I wouldn't recommend drinking this.
No.
Because it's unremarkable, it's plain, it's just kind of, what's the point? But our goal was to make something clean and neutral so that then kind of opens up the horizon of what you can do with it. We can build on it. And so we got a couple things we want to try, I think, today. I think first off, we should take this and put it over ice.
Yes.
And put some lime in it.
Agreed.
A lime seltzer. So we'll be back in just a second. We're gonna do a lime seltzer, see how that comes out. We added ice. So we did a fresh pour. Cheers.
Cheers.
Haven't added the lime yet though. Let's just do one and then we'll drop it in and see.
Cheers.
Ooh.
Instantly, that's better.
Ooh. Needs a little more carbonation.
Yeah.
I think that would help it, make it a little more effervescent. I think I was only keeping it like 15 PSI. I think it could use a little touch more carbonation, but otherwise, boy, that is refreshing.
The lime really takes away the sulfur.
And it crisps it up.
Yep.
Brightens it up. I definitely think we're on the right track. We got it nice and clean. I think we need to push this up a notch. I do want to, we got one more test we're going to do. We got some pre-done like cocktail kits where it comes with the flavor pack and you're just supposed to add the alcohol. I really wanted to see if we could take something like this, and if you wanted to do like a Moscow Mule, you could do it with this instead of adding additional hard alcohol. You know?
Agreed.
Just keep it like this and keep it light. Espresso martini. So let's give this a try.
So this is us putting in how much seltzer?
We're doing 5 ounces of seltzer because they recommended a shot of vodka and then, what was it, 3 ounces of soda water. Oh, this is gonna foam up. So what's gonna be interesting with this is that typically an espresso martini isn't carbonated. We're gonna give it a little stir, we're gonna split it and taste it.
Actually, it
does it?
Honestly smells really good.
You only live once. Cheers.
It's not bad, actually.
That's confusing as hell.
Actually, if I'm gonna be honest though, these packets are pretty awesome.
Yeah. That's a breakfast liqueur. Get you up in the morning.
It's not bad.
Okay, all right. Ginger Mule. There's a lot less powder in this one. Okay, cheers.
Cheers. Okay, less sulfur smell.
A lot of lime.
A lot of lime.
Which seems to be in ginger. It seems to help with the fermented smell. Wow.
This is crazy good.
Okay, there is none of the sulfur. That is really good. Okay, you know what would make this better? It was 9%.
It would.
You need, and I'm wondering too, if we push this to 9%, if it will actually have more of a warming quality. Like sometimes the ABV of like a barley wine, it tends to be a little bit warmer. I think that would help this tremendously, but this is really good on its own.
This is by far my favorite thing.
Yes, yeah, more to come. More to come with that. We're gonna brew this again. We're gonna push it at 9%. We're gonna have to deploy some different things, I think, to help keep the yeast happy so that sulfur presence isn't overpowering. I'd love to be able to lower it even more. I don't know if that's possible. Wow.
I never do that on camera. You guys always know I always have like a glass full after.
Wow.
That was good.
That hits perfectly. But yeah, check these out. We're gonna have it linked in the description below for Amazon. Now, you can do this on a Pot-Au-Brew like we did, but you could do it on any other brewing system, really, especially with some of the countertop ones. We might try to push this in some of other systems that we've done before. But I call this a success, and I think we're ready to move on to phase 2. And we're gonna ramp it up. We're gonna see if we can get a higher ABV. So stay tuned for that video. We're gonna do it again, repeat it again on the Pot-Au-Brew. I love that little brewing system. If you've done this before, or you have any tips and tricks for our viewers, please let us know, because I really wanna make sure we get this information out there for the brewers that are brewing their beer, but sometimes we want to do something a little bit different and want to be able to create some different flavors and things. So thank you guys so much for watching all the way through. Catch you later, my friends.